Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So we are covering the presentation titled CV, Personal Statement, and Letters of Recommendation. And so you might be wondering, like, was this the right session I signed up for? Because I think it was titled Personal Statement and Letters of Rec. But as I started, updating my presentation on this, I've come to realize that the CV part is just as important, or maybe even more important than the other two parts, because that comes before the other. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So just FYI, I just added in that CV part there. And then thank you so much for joining us. I see some familiar names out there, so thank you. And then also I see some new ones. So I just wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Kiana Shiroma. I'm the director of the Pre-Health Pre-Law Advising Center. And I also want to thank Casey and Amy for assisting me with the tech side today for this presentation. So since we have a little bit of a smaller group for this particular workshop, I wanted to see if maybe I could possibly personalize this or what I'm covering a little bit more. So if you can put in the chat your field that you're interested in pursuing, like for example, if you're pre-med, pre-dentistry, so on and so forth, if you could put that in there, and then I can try to see if I can provide some more specific examples for you. Also, I did want to share that this webinar will be recorded, and the reason being is that for those who miss it, then they're able to watch it later on. And then also, if you wanted to go back and rewatch some parts of the presentation, you can do so as well. And then just FYI, we will also be sharing a PDF of the slides too, so you don't have to take a ton of notes if you don't want to. And then also we have tons of different links in the slides as well. So you can take a look at those too later on if you want. And so let's just go ahead and get started because we do have a lot to cover. So like I said earlier, we will be covering three different parts, right? So CV, personal statement, and letters of recommendation. And all of these items are important for different reasons, right? So for all of you who are in pre-health, it's important for your future applications to health professional schools, but then it goes beyond that, right? Like you need to have these items for other parts too of your life, right? Scholarships, grants, jobs, fellowships, and whatnot. And then also your future careers and whatever field that might be in. This is important, or these items are of particular importance for pre-health students because, as you probably know already, unfortunately, pre-health is very competitive, right? It's very hard, challenging to get into health professional schools. And so, just even like for medical school, right? Like 6 out of 10 medical school applicants are not accepted. So in other words, only 40% of applicants are accepted, right? So it's just goes to show like how competitive it might be for you to get in. And so we really want to make sure that you have strong application materials, right? So definitely quality over quantity. And so going a little bit more into what makes a strong pre-health student, that does include a variety of different things listed here. So obviously there's courses, prereqs, and GPA, as well as entrance exams. But then there's all these other areas of the application that are required for pre-health students. So that would be field-related experience, personality traits, demonstrating commitment to service, and that you have a well-rounded life, and then also letters of support or recommendation. So to be able to demonstrate those 4 items that are in bold, you need to have the experiences, right? You need to have to be able to have a strong curriculum vitae or resume, a personal statement, and letters of recommendation. You need to have the experiences to be able to demonstrate that you have not just these traits, but then also you have content to write about, right, in these different pieces. And then you also want your references to be able to talk a lot about you in a really strong way as well. Before we go any further, I did want to share too that if you have any questions or maybe parts of the presentation that you want me to go further into depth, please feel free to type your questions or concerns in the chat. And then we also have the Q&A open too. And so I will try to monitor and answer those questions as we go, but if not, I might save those for the end as well. Okay, so when I talk about experiences, there are a variety of different ones that we strongly recommend that you get, right? So research, community service, volunteering, shadowing, leadership, internship, and direct patient care. So I did have to thank Lauren, who is a senior peer leader in our office. She completely redid the slides and added in those links that I mentioned earlier. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can click on those links once you get those PDFs of the slides. And then you can look at more information that I just unfortunately can't cover during the short time that we have together. So yeah, these experiences in terms of the importance of them might vary depending on the field that you're in. So I see in the chat that we have a pre-PA student here. So for pre-PA students, the main focus is on getting as much direct patient care as possible, because that's what PA schools like really value, as opposed to pre-med. Unfortunately, med schools, they want it all. They want a variety of different experiences. And so just to demonstrate for JAMSUM, the John A. Burns School of Medicine, which is the only school of medicine in Hawaii at the moment, they definitely value specific experiences, as you can see down here, right? So it would include community service, physician shadowing, medical or clinical community service or volunteering, and whether that's volunteering or paid. And then last but not least would be research, right? So you want to see what field best or values which experiences the most. Okay, so with that, these kinds of experiences, these are also ways that you can demonstrate how you are a great pre-health student in your field. And so for, again, going back to medicine as an example, medical schools, when they review your applications and interview you, what they're also looking for, besides like the GPA and the MCAT scores, would also be core competencies. And then so these were created by medical schools. So there's basically 4 different groups: thinking and reasoning and science, and then also intra and interpersonal competencies. And so as you can see, these kinds of traits can be demonstrated through the application. So when you write about these experiences, these are the competencies that you want to write about, and how you either establish these competencies within yourself, or better honed or prepared you to have these competencies. And so these are what you want to think about when you're considering different kinds of opportunities to look into, right? So these are questions that you also want to look at as well, right? Or consider. It's like, how would you better, or how do these experiences help better prepare you to become a better future med student, or health professional student, and or practitioner within the field? Okay, so to get started, you can look at our experience and opportunities page, so you can get an idea of what you'd want to do. However, I did want to share too, though, that ideally I would want you to get experience too, especially with shadowing and direct patient contact, because my main goal for you as your pre-health advisor is to make sure that this field is right for you, whatever field you choose, right? We want to make sure that's the right field for you, because I have had applicants who applied and have never really shadowed a healthcare practitioner, or much less had direct patient contact. And so for some of them, they realized later on that they didn't actually like working with other people's bodily fluids. And so or maybe it was a lot of pressure in that field, or so on and so forth. And so I definitely want you to get experience to make sure it's the right field for you. Another suggestion that I have for you is to also follow us on our social media. And that way you can look at more kind of like recent opportunities that are coming up, as opposed to our experience and opportunities page. These are kind of more standing experiences that we can post without it changing too much. Whereas the social media is kind of like ongoing, right? Like as we get them, we post them. Other considerations that I would recommend that you think about when thinking about what kinds of experiences to go into would be listed here. So the time commitment that is required of you to be able to participate in these experiences, location and traffic, because as we all know, that's a huge consideration for those who live in Hawaii. And then also making sure that you still prioritize your classes and studying for them and work and so on and so forth, because the main focus is to make sure that you balance, because like I said in the beginning, right, it's about quality over quantity. And then whatever you decide to do, make sure that you keep track, and I'll go over that in a little bit more. And then last but not least, thinking about what interests you and what you're most passionate about, because like I said earlier, these experiences will lead to a stronger CV, personal statement, and then after that, letters of recommendation. Okay, so I do strongly recommend that you start now. And when you do start participating in events or experiences, like I said earlier, keep track. And like I said before too, it's because all of these experiences will be included in your applications once you decide what you want to go into. And so these are things that I would recommend considering. And then another tool that you could possibly use is our experience log template, which is linked in the upper right-hand corner too. So you can take a look at that. So I'm gonna pause here real quick because some good questions came up in the chat. And so first question was, what is the recommended number of hours for shadowing? And so like I said earlier, it really depends on the field. Like some like PA, they don't value shadowing nearly as much as a direct patient contact. However, for medicine in particular, I'm assuming we're in medicine. I'm not sure if we are. You can put it in the chat if not. But if we are in medicine, then I would, there are numbers that you can look at or that we've looked at. And so generally speaking, more competitive applicants or ones who were accepted into medical school had around 1 to 200 hours of shadowing. And so it's really important for you to get started on that sooner rather than later. And then another question that was asked was also like, would volunteering in a hospital, even though it's not shadowing, count towards those hours? And the answer is no. So when you list your experiences as shadowing, it only can be shadowing. Okay, so what that means is that you need to be able to only do that. So not volunteer at a hospital at the same time or get the patient contact at the same time. You only can shadow. And when I say shadow, it literally means being a shadow, right? Like being a shadow in the patient room while the physician is working on the patient. Or if you're pre-dentistry, right, just watching the dentist work. So it is very clear cut in terms of what shadowing is, and it cannot overlap with other types of experiences. So great questions. Another question that came in was how to subscribe to a newsletter. So once we send you the PDF of the slides, then if you click on the link or the image, then it will go directly to or the links to our social media on the left and then our newsletter on the right. So just a Google form that you'll complete later on. And then actually, if I can ask Casey or Amy to post, thanks. We have another attendee join into and then put the link in the chat. So if Casey or Amy can put that in the chat for everyone, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, so moving right along, another way that I want you to keep track of all of your experiences is by creating a CV. And so that, just to clarify, in case we have people who don't know the similarities or the differences, is that CV is basically like everything that you have ever completed, right? Your curriculum vitae. So everything that you've ever done, I want you to put that in there. And then resume is basically like when you're applying for a specific opportunity, then you pull whatever experiences are related to that opportunity, and then you pull that and you create a resume. Okay, so that's the idea. So usually a CV is like super long. Like for example, mine is like, I think over 30 pages at this point because I've logged everything on. But then if I were to apply to another position, I would just pull, what I think is most relevant for that particular position and then create a resume. Generally speaking, it's usually about 1 to 2 pages. So that's what you would pull, right? It's what's important or what's targeted. So you need to have experiences to fill that CV to be able to then pull from that to create a really strong resume. So I get this question all of the time in terms of what is a sample, I'm sorry, what is a curriculum vitae? And so we have a sample linked here, and then let me just show it to you real quick. Let me just reformat my screen. Hold on real fast. Okay, so this is our sample CV here. As you can see, it's a Google Doc. So if you want to, you can make a copy and then save it on your own and then input it, input your experiences as you see fit. This is another way to keep track as well in regards to your experiences. However, I do have to share though that with the CV and then also with the resume, I don't recommend anything too fancy. Generally speaking, I don't like templates because they usually involve like different fonts and colors and whatnot. And the colors and the different fonts should not be the focus point of the CV or the resume. It should be what you've done, right? The experiences. And so as you can see here, it's very plain, right? It's very simple. And it's because the experiences themselves should be the ones that speak for you, not the color or format of, I'm sorry, color or font of your application pieces. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation and move on to personal statement. So with the personal statement, it is basically an essay that you can write, right? So it gives you an opportunity to talk more about yourself than just, what's listed in your classes or GPA, as well as your entrance exam score. And so it's a way for the admissions committees to really learn more about you and to be able for you, or to give you a chance to be able to set yourself apart from other applicants, okay? And then also one other thing is that in your applications, usually you just talk about those experiences that I mentioned earlier, right? Let me pull that up real quick. So like the ones that are listed here. However, for many of you, you probably started being interested in a specific health field before you even started college, right? So for your applications for health professional school, as well as these other opportunities here, usually you can only list in your applications, in your CV and resume, everything that you've done from college on. However, what I was getting at earlier is that probably a lot of you knew you wanted to get into health or maybe even that specific field before you even started college. And so if that was a case for you and you wanted to share with the admissions committees about why you wanted to go into health earlier, then you can talk about those things there, right? So in the personal statement, you can already share that you've known that you wanted to go into these fields earlier on. So that's great. But also note that the personal statement prompt can vary per field. So for allopathic medicine, the prompt is very broad, right? It's just literally use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. Whereas for PT, it can be very specific and change, I think, every like 2 to 3 years. And so the current prompt for this particular cycle is shown there. So basically, how will you embody this vision of APTA's vision of being transforming society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience? So how will you embody this vision as a future PT, right? So they're very specific about what they want you to write about. So again, you want to make sure that you answer the prompt, whatever that is. If it's more of a general one though, like AMCAS, then these are other experiences that you might want to, or sorry, other questions to consider when you are answering the prompt. So if it's a general prompt, then you can also include these other questions like, why did you choose this field? What have you done to prepare yourself? What kinds of skills and knowledge have you gained? What do you think it would be a great, or why do you think you'd be a great professional in this field? And then what are your future plans and goals, right? So all of these can help you also, or these questions you can also think about when you're doing experiences as well. And then they're supposed to help you, right? Like think about what kinds of experiences you want to choose. And when you do participate in experiences, think about how they help you become a better future student or professional within your chosen field. Okay. So whatever prompt you're given, just make sure that you answer all areas of the prompt. Okay, so for MCAS, right, it can be very broad, right, like how we talked about earlier, but for PTCAS it can be very specific. So just make sure that you answer the prompt. And I know it sounds like very silly to do. However, I would say around half of the personal statements that I review the first time around, oftentimes they don't even answer the prompt. So for example, I have a lot of applicants who send me medical school personal statements to review, and they don't talk about medicine. They don't talk about law. And so again, I have to refer them back to the prompt and make sure that their essay actually addresses the prompt. So please don't try to use your application essay that you use to try to apply to college, because ideally you have changed since then. And then I would assume that the prompt would be very different from then until now anyway, right? So just make sure you answer the prompt, okay? You can start by jotting things down. And this is why I do strongly recommend that you keep an experience log, or it doesn't even have to be electronic. It could be a notebook. I don't care what it is, but just jot things down and do this as you go, right? So as you are engaging in your experiences, jot down like maybe traits that you have gained or strengthened, anything that you've learned, phrases or sentences that you might want to include later on in your personal statement, or maybe in secondary application essays, like anything else that you want to remember later on down the line about your experiences, because you do need to write about them, like I said earlier, right, in your experience descriptions for your applications, as well as your personal statements, right? So you want to jot these things down. And the reason being is that once you do actually have to start writing, which would be at least 3 months before the deadline, I want you to be able to look back and review your notes, right? So if you don't jot things down now, then when the time comes for you to actually make an outline, you're starting from scratch, right? You're starting from a blank document, which is very difficult and challenging to do. So I do strongly recommend that, also because you're not going to remember, right? Like a lot of people think that, oh, they'll recall that specific patient or whatnot, but in reality, you probably won't. Like, for example, for me, I can't even remember what I ate for dinner like last week, right? How am I expecting you to remember that particular patient conversation that you've had that was meaningful at the time, but maybe harder to remember, a year or two from then. So really, jot things down as you go. So once you do hit that time to actually start drafting, at first, so you can review your notes and then just start writing. Okay, so I don't care what the word limit or the character limit is at that time, just start writing. And you don't even have to have like the intro, body, conclusion at that time. Just start jotting things down. And it could be like different paragraphs, and then you can, group them and reorganize them later on, but just get something down on paper and then work from there. Okay, so generally speaking, though, from there, then you can think about, okay, which of these paragraphs do you want to include in your outline? Because regardless of whatever the prompt is, your personal statement will still need the basic parts of an academic or professional essay, which would be an intro, body, and conclusion. And then most personal statements for the health professional school applications are basically around like 4,500 to 5,300 characters, which does include spaces. And so it's a little bit over a page, single space, 12-point font for you to write. So it's not a lot of space to write. So getting a little bit more down into it, when you have the intro and conclusion paragraphs, you only have the body, which would only be around 2 to 3 paragraphs that you can, really write out. So again, like you want to think about after you write everything out, which of these do you want to include in that body, right? So what do you, again, thinking back about like, what do you want the admissions committees to know about you that they haven't already known from other parts of your application? Okay. And then, like I said earlier, you know, you can write about anything you want as long as it relates to the prompt. However, I do have these recommendations as well. So, be honest, state facts, be descriptive, and then also you can give examples, right? So you want to be memorable. You want to illustrate a really strong and clear picture of what you mean. And so that can also mean like being reflective and personalize your essay, but then also still being professional. So when you're drafting those things out, these are things that I would recommend that you consider. And then as you go, then start condensing, right? Trying to get down closer to that character or word limit. And then once it is ready to review, then I do recommend having around 3 reviewers to look at your draft. And that would include ideally at least 2 of them being from the profession. And the reason being is that's who is going to be reviewing, or that kind of professional is going to be in your admissions committees, right? Like when they review your applications, that's what is going to be, or that's who's going to be considered or included, right? And so you want to make sure that you get that kind of perspective. I can also be a reviewer as well if you want, but that's totally up to you. But I would recommend around 3, just because if the more reviewers you have, the more likely that their feedback will conflict with each other, and then you'll kind of be stuck and not sure what to do. That's why I just recommend around 3. The tricky part is that, you know, professionals, including myself, can be really busy, right? And unfortunately, I tend to get application review requests all at the same time. And so that's why I do recommend giving reviewers around 2 weeks to review, because we want to be, respectful of their time. Okay. And then last but not least would be to review and submit, right? So with most of the application systems that I know of, you cannot copy and paste. So you're literally going to have to like type your personal statement in. So just make sure that you definitely proofread, right? Once you do type your whole personal statement in. Another resource that I wanted to mention too that I hadn't already was the Manoa Career Center. So they can also review your personal statement if you want as well. Okay, so then so we covered the CV, right? And then the personal statement. And then last but not least would be letters of recommendation. And so I'm gonna actually switch a little bit in terms of how the information is listed here. So I'm gonna start off with whom actually. So whom would be, the first and foremost, it'd be people who can write the best letters of recommendation for you. So again, I go back to the experiences, right? So for people to be able to write strong letters of recommendation for you, they need to be able to pull from their experiences with you, right? Like that. They need to also have strong meaningful experiences with you to be able to write letters of recommendation for you. And so, for example, I am often asked as a pre-health advisor for UH Manoa, or UH Manoa's only pre-health advisor, to write letters of recommendation for applicants. However, some of these applicants, they don't have any experiences for me to pull from, right? So besides GPA and MCAT, what else am I supposed to write about, right? If this person has never shadowed, never gained direct patient contact, then how do I say that they're able to be successful medical school students, or that they know what it takes, what it's like to be a physician? I wouldn't know, right? So same with your references that you're asking to write letters for you, is that you want them to have strong experiences with you, right? So you need to have strong experiences to be able to do that, okay? So that's why, again, it's really important to have meaningful experiences. So another example is that it's great that you volunteer in a hospital, which I often have applicants do. However, a lot of them just sit at the front desk, right? And then they help visitors, direct them, or maybe like push patients around, which is great. However, again, right, like when your supervisor writes a letter of recommendation for you regarding your volunteer work, like what are they going to say, right? How are they going to say that you've fulfilled the core competencies that we talked about earlier here and here, right? Like they might be able to, but it might be very superficial, right? If all you're doing is helping people at the front desk, as opposed to maybe another applicant who was a medical scribe or a medical assistant for a physician, right? And with that kind of experience, it's much more active, right? It's much more in depth in terms of all of these things here, right? Intra and interpersonal skills, thinking and reasoning and science competencies, right? So again, you want to think about what kinds of competencies are you creating or are you honing with your experiences so that your references can write about them, right? Write about the impact that you're making. So what I like to say, for lack of better words, is basically you want to get experiences in which you gave, right? You contributed, and then also what you got, right? So those core competencies that you've honed. And although these are for medical schools, I will guarantee you that other health professional schools and professions are looking for very similar, if not the same competencies in their applicants too, right? So once you decide or are able to determine who would write strong letters of recommendation for you, then another thing, or there are some other considerations too when you're thinking about who to ask. First would be to check individual schools because unfortunately all of them differ. And so you want to make sure that whoever you ask, you'll actually use their letters for your application and then to make sure that they apply to those. Generally speaking, though, there are some themes with the letters in that many schools do prefer ones from employers or supervisors, as well as science professors in particular. So I'm saying that now because that is a little bit different, right? Like you're not going to get a strong like science course professor letter from those experiences that I mentioned earlier. They're going to come from your actual classes, right? So with the classes, you want to make sure that you try to establish a strong connection with your science class professors. And don't get me wrong, I know it's going to be very challenging to do because we're at a university, usually the classes are very large. Me as an undergrad here at UH Manoa, I didn't talk with my professors. I was scared of them. Like I thought they were going to bite my head off, right? So I didn't talk with them. So it was, later on, it was really challenging for me to get a letter of recommendation from my professors. And so, don't do a Kiana. Talk to the professors if you have questions or maybe content that you want to cover with them. Talk with them, right? Like go to their office hours. Another suggestion that I have is to try to possibly take, more classes from the same professors. So again, you can build that relationship with them. And then even if you may not talk with them that much, they'd be able to write a letter of recommendation for you saying that you did well repeatedly, right, in their different classes, okay? A couple of other things to consider is, to choose professors or references who can write professionally and eloquently, and then also ideally be able to talk about different areas of competencies with about you. So science professors and employers or supervisors are really good because usually, like generally speaking, science professors can talk about these core competencies, right? Like thinking, reasoning, and science, whereas employers and supervisors can talk maybe a little bit more about your intra and interpersonal skills, right? So together they can cover all four areas much more in depth than as opposed to like two science professors or two supervisors, right? So think about how you can cover all four areas with your letters of recommendation as well. Okay, and then on the left-hand side, we have the how should I ask? And I would ask in person if possible, but I know, with being post-COVID and all might be a little bit tricky to do. However, if you can, that'd be great, especially if you do work with them like in person consistently, then it makes sense to ask in person. If not, then you can just ask, through email, and that's fine too. I know it's kind of an awkward question to ask, but I would strongly recommend asking your reference if they feel comfortable or if they feel like they know you well enough to write a strong letter of rec. And the reason being is that they will be honest with you. I am honest with my applicants for whom I am worried that I won't write the strongest letter possible. I tell them I'm worried, right? I might not be able to. Maybe you should ask someone else, right? So you can also, when you ask, if you do ask in person, is to watch how they react, right? Or if they seem doubtful, even through email too, then it might be best to just ask someone else. Okay. Should they do ask, or I'm sorry, should they do agree, then I would strongly recommend that you provide these items on the left-hand side. So your job as someone who's requesting a letter of rec is to make it as easy as possible for them, right? Like give them the instructions, the deadline, your CV. If it's for medical school, then the guidelines for letter writers, which includes the core competencies, your transcripts, your list of classes, right? Like maybe highlighted work that you want them to remember about you. And then your personal statement, even if it's a draft, that's fine. But again, you want them to get the fullest picture of you as possible before they write the letter, okay? And then when you do give this information, kind of similarly to how I talked about asking for feedback for the personal statement, you want to give the references a lot of time to write the letter too. So when you do ask them like at least a month ahead. I would also recommend giving a earlier deadline around 2 weeks before, so that way, if for whatever reason they don't submit it by that deadline that you provided, then you still have time to check in with them, ask them to write it, and then still be able to submit it before the deadline. And so it would generally be like two steps, right? First would be asking in person or through email without the packet, right? Without the things provided on the left-hand side. And then the second step would be to actually deliver that information, okay? And then for a lot of opportunities out there, most of them you submit only electronically. And so if that is an option, then I do strongly recommend that. Another option would be those who maybe are thinking about applying later on, or they're ending a class from whom they want to ask a letter of recommendation, but then they're not going to be submitting that letter until later on. Then another great option for you is to create an Interfolio account. So it's basically an account in which you can have the letters of recommendation held. And then when the time comes for them to, or for you to have the letter sent, then you have Interfolio send that letter for you. The reason why these opportunity or these kinds of options are available is because you cannot touch the letter, okay? You can never look at the letter or touch the letter because that demonstrates two things. So first is that you're telling admissions committees that you don't trust what they're saying, what the references are saying. And then also it may not be, or it probably won't be accepted by the organizations if you submit it yourself. It always has to be directly from the reference. Also, in that same vein, sometimes you'll be asked a question if do you waive your rights to view the letters of recommendation? And you always say yes. And again, it's for those two reasons, right? You want to demonstrate to the admissions committees that you have complete trust in your reference, so you don't have to look at the reference. And then you're also telling the reference the same thing, in that you completely trust what they're writing, and then you do not need to view what they say about you. If you're worried about that, right? If what the reference is going to say about you, then you probably shouldn't ask them. Okay, ask someone else. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here and see, just check the chat and the Q&A. Okay, I think we're good for now. So that basically covers the three parts, right? The CV, the personal statement, and the letters of recommendation. And so I do strongly recommend that you start with experiences, right? And make sure that, whatever you're engaged in is meaningful, right? If you're giving and you're getting, and then from there, you'll be able to write stronger personal statements and get stronger letters of recommendation too. Okay. So you may already know this, but we are in the midst of our workshop series. And so although the previous ones are already presented, we do have our presentation library, which you can watch the recordings and download the slides if you want. But then we also have other ones that are coming up too. So some to note would be the MCAT and GRE overviews. Unfortunately, the in-person basic life support and first aid classes are full already. So those we thank SAPFB for funding for those. We might be able to provide those again in the future. But going back to what I said earlier, some to note might be the MCAT and GRE overviews, as well as the mock DAT, GRE, and MCAT. And then just FYI, to be really honest with you, with those mock exams, although we have a specific day and time that are listed, to be honest, as long as you sign up, you have up to 3 months to actually take those exams. So we have the date and time listed there just because we found that completion rate and registration rates are so much higher when we do post specific days and times. So if you want to take it at that time, you'll have the information by then. But if not, you have up to 3 months after that Saturday, March 11th date to take the exams. And then last but not least, if you're thinking about a gap year, then I would strongly recommend that you do that. And then with all three of the workshops, so MCAT, overview, GRE overview, and gap years, just FYI, we'll have panels of people who have recently participated or like took the MCAT or GREs or recently completed a gap year or maybe multiple ones. We'll have panels in these sessions as well, so you can hear directly from the people who have had experiences with these particular aspects of the application. Okay. I don't see any other questions or concerns. However, I will stick around in case you have any that you wanted me to talk through individually. Oh, I did have one come up. So if you plan on taking a gap year, when do you ask for a letter of recommendation? And then if you would like to ask a professor, do you ask after the course with them or wait until you apply? So I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, is that, but let me just clarify and talk a little bit more about that, because this is a really good question that I get often. So I would recommend asking for a letter of rec to be written as soon as the opportunity, experience, or class ends. Okay, and then if you're not applying though until later on, that's when I would strongly recommend opening an Interfolio account so that that reference can send that letter, right? Like as soon as they're done teaching the class that you're in or being your supervisor, so they can write it while you're still fresh in their mind, and then Interfolio will hold on to it. And then once you're ready to apply, then you tell Interfolio to send those letters to the application service. So great questions. I'm glad I could have kind of gone further into depth about those. Okay, and then like I said earlier, I'll stick around in case there are any other questions or concerns. But I wanted to thank you so much for attending. I know it was a lot of information within a short amount of time. So please feel free to schedule an appointment with us and I can talk more about your specific situations or questions that you may have. And then also I'm available for any review for any of these materials, whether it's your CV, and or personal statement, or if you want to talk more about which references to ask specifically, please feel free to just schedule an appointment with me or email us, and then we can get you that advice and information. Okay, well, thank you so much for attending. Thank you to Casey and Amy for being our techies, and to Lauren for refreshing my very outdated slides. I appreciate you too. So thank you, but I'll stick around. Thanks.
John, can I ask you one question? I forgot if you mentioned this in the previous meeting, but Weren't there some application system that do not accept letters from the third parties? I forgot which ones they were.
Um, so not from other third parties, but Interfolio, they still do. Good question.
Okay,
Yeah,
double
but it
checking.
might vary. That's a good question to ask. Yeah, it might vary. But usually Interfolio at this point have still been accepted by application systems.
Okay, just double checking.
Good question.